Mobile hunters, are you looking to make the move to saddle hunting this year? Or maybe you just want to add a few new pieces of gear or upgrade your current saddle gear. If that's the case, then head over to tetherednation.com where they've got all mobile hunters covered. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old timer, Tethered is your one-stop saddle shop. From saddles to ropes, sticks, ascenders, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. I've personally been using their gear for the past 3 seasons now. My base setup consists of the Phantom saddle and the Predator platform. And if you're wondering why I've chosen to use their gear above all else, here's the cliff notes. They're innovative and pushing the mobile hunting forward overall. They cut no corners and prioritize the safety and performance of their gear. They care about the community that they've created, and their gear allows me to hunt free. And above all else, I like to support good people doing good work. If you're interested in upping your mobile hunting game, then head to tetherednation.com. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker, they're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 220. Today I'm joined by accomplished Adirondack mountain and DIY travel hunter, Todd Mead. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. It's crazy to think that I think it's this week that we actually spring the clocks forward. So I've been noticing, man, the days are just getting a little bit longer, and then they'll officially get a lot longer this week once we push the clocks forward, which is always kind of a nice milestone to hit. That allows you to get outside, do some things outside, maybe after work. I love the fall. Obviously, it's my favorite time of year and through the winter, especially during hunting season. And so I don't mind those short days, so to speak, when I'm able to be, outside, chasing deer with a bow. But as soon as that stops, man, I got to tell you, I look forward to when the days get a little longer, just because it feels like there's so much I want to get done outside that I just don't have the time to do, given, when I get up to work out before work, it's dark. When I get done with work, it's dark. So that leaves very little time to do things outside. So I'm always appreciative when I get just a little bit more of that daylight. And it also, means you can do a little bit more bow shooting outside, weather permitting, right? You have a little bit more daylight. So hopefully you can do some of those things. Maybe even steal a scout or two, after work, hit the timber. That's always a possibility too, which is nice. Maybe if there's somewhere where you need to kind of make a quick run through, you can do it in the couple hours of daylight you have after you get out of work. And that was kind of not that I was doing it after work, but that was kind of what I did this past week. And I finally made another attempt to try to get out and do a little bit of scouting. This one area I had been wanting to look at. And it's really weird when you think of snow and snowfall and stuff like that in your general area. It's like I look out my window and I'm like, oh, okay, the snow's melting off pretty good. But literally I travel a half hour in one direction, from my place to, where I wanted to scout. And it's like they had a completely different snowfall scenario. Like it's not melted off really at all. It certainly had melted since the initial snowfall that we got, but not anywhere near enough to actually be able to do any legitimate scouting or make it even somewhat enjoyable. So me and the pooch went out and did a few miles and kind of met the same fate that we met the last time we tried to go out, which was just there was a pile of snow and it was hard trekking. And so we got to the area that we wanted to get to, the clear cut that I wanted to get to check out. And there wasn't a whole lot of sign there. There wasn't a whole lot to be found. And in fact, I kind of bamboozled myself, to be quite honest, because whenever I found it last year, I just kind of stumbled onto it. And when I looked on the map and I kind of started checking things out, like the clear cut looked pretty big. And in fact, it is. But the place that I had seen and that I stumbled onto that was fresh was actually it was the front of and adjacent to an older cut that was behind it. So when I look at it on the map, it looks like this sizable clear cut in what I had thought, because I'd never been there before, that I thought it had all just been cut. But the reality was that the fresh cut was actually just a really small portion of it, and I made my way through that pretty quick. And then on the back side of it was a cut that was probably, I don't know, probably anywhere 10 years old, maybe 7 to 10 years old. I'd venture a guess probably closer to 10, which is very similar for a lot of cuts that I had walked through on that piece in other areas. They were all cut probably around the same time, because it was just super high stem count, but not the type that's huntable and not the type that's really providing any sustenance for deer, so to speak. So it wasn't all briary and nasty. It was just a bunch of really young trees that were kind of packed in tightly together. So I did find a few rubs here and there. Nothing to really write home about. There was still snow, obviously, and I didn't even really see many tracks in and around that general area. So we kind of made our way quickly through what I thought would be the kind of the prime stuff, and then we looped back out, and that was kind of it. I did have plans to hit 2 other pieces that were close to there, but just with the amount of snow that was on the ground, I felt that it was probably in my better interest to make my way back home and take care of a few items that were on the honey-do list, and get that squashed. That way, as the weather turns to warm this next week, the snow melts off, that I'll actually be free and clear in these upcoming weekends to get out and really kind of put the pedal to the metal, because I'm probably a month behind, like a lot of you probably are, that have been snowed in for the past couple weeks as well. But with that, 2 things I want to pass along to you guys before we jump into today's podcast. One, pass along a discount for some Skull Brew coffee. You can head over to skullbrewcoffee.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout, and that will get you a discount on every product that is on the site. Definitely want to check out the travel pour over packets. Those are killer for whenever you're going out scouting. If you're going away for a weekend to scout, take some killer coffee with you. It's not instant coffee. It's actually legit coffee made for pour over and for travel. So check that out. And then the other one is passing along a discount to you all for Truth from the Stand merch. You can head to the website, truthfromthestand.com, go to the merch tab, and then click on, whatever item you're interested in. We have sweatshirts, coffee mugs, t-shirts, a bunch of stuff there. If you use the promo code TFTS21 at checkout, that will save you some cash too. So with that, have a cool show for you today. Have Todd Mead on. Todd is from New York. He hails from around the area of the Adirondacks. He grew up and cut his teeth hunting the big woods of the Adirondacks. And I think a lot of times when we talk big woods, or we think about big woods, a lot of times it might just be several thousands or tens of thousands of acres, even, in kind of unbroken timber with, very little structure and low deer density, which are all true. But whenever Todd talks about hunting the big woods of the Adirondacks, we're talking, an area that is just a wilderness area, I guess is probably the best way to say it. It's super vast, lots of different type of habitat, lots of different type of terrain, super low deer density. And it's one of those places, I would kind of liken it to, hunting out west, where you just have like these millions of acres of unbroken timber that you're able to kind of traipse about, that can be extremely challenging to hunt, especially when you're talking about trying to hunt a mature whitetail. And Todd has proven himself over and over again with a long line of success in hunting the big woods of the Adirondacks, and has plenty of mounts to show for it. So I was super excited to talk to him. Not only that, but he also is an accomplished DIY kind of travel bow hunter, everything from, elk to whitetails and so forth. But what we kind of focus in on more specifically is obviously the whitetail part of the conversation. So not only did he, find success in some really hard areas to hunt in his home state in and around the Adirondack Mountains, but he also took those learnings and then started kind of exploring and branching out and seeing how he could kind of up his game and use the things he knows from hunting the big woods, and how they would translate to some of these other Midwestern states. And he wrote a book, and I mentioned it in the podcast that I had been reading, and he talks a lot about hunting the Adirondacks and kind of it's how he kind of took those learnings and extrapolated them out to hunting the Midwest. And one thing that I thought was interesting, he mentioned in the book, was that, the Adirondacks certainly are hard to hunt. The big woods are certainly hard to hunt. And people kind of make the jump or the assumption that when you hunt the Midwest and some of these other areas, where you have more structure, higher deer densities, that it's easier on public lands or whatever the case is. And I like the way he kind of frames it, because I think, yeah, you're going to see more deer, and I would agree with that. And but what he says, I think that really rings true, is that no matter where you're hunting a mature whitetail, a whitetail buck, he always has the upper hand. He's always going to, have the opportunity to best you, because he lives in that environment 24/7. And so that was one of the things that I thought was interesting that he learned as he started kind of branching out and traveling to these different places. He went from a place that was extremely hard to hunt to places that a lot of people would consider to be easier to kill a mature deer. But whenever you're chasing a mature deer, what he had found is that they are equal to the task, no matter what state you're hunting in. So with Todd, I have a 2-part series. This is a 2-part series because we spent a fair amount of time together, and the session was really long. So I'm cutting this into 2 parts. This first part, we talk a lot about Todd's kind of how he got introduced to hunting, and then we start into the big woods conversation, and then part 2 will be forthcoming. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today, I feel like we almost even had a podcast in our pre-record, just our catch-up. I could talk to this guy for forever, and that's what we're going to plan to do here. As you guys listening know, I love all things DIY hunting, bow hunting, love all things travel hunting. And I'm always kind of seeking out those people that I can learn from, and just to kind of explore the finer points of bow hunting and travel hunting. And it was actually turned on to the gentleman that I have on the phone with me now by a fellow who listens to this podcast. His name's Jay Jackson. So Jay, I want to give you a shout out and say thank you for connecting me to Mr. Todd Mead of the great state of New York. He is a mountain hunter by trade, maybe in the Adirondacks, but has been traveling for years, has written a couple books, one of which I have in my hand right now that I just wrapped up reading, called Pursuing Public Land Bucks. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Todd, and looking forward to chatting, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clint. And I don't know, hopefully we can make Jay look intelligent. So I'm not sure I know everything that he thinks I do, but I'll give it a whirl.
Hey man, that's sometimes it pays to be able to I'm trying to figure out how to say it. It pays to be able to provide the illusion sometimes. Fake it till you make it, maybe might be one way to say it, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I guess I've been somewhat successful, and from afar it looks impressive, but as you live day to day, like it just becomes kind of like a norm. Yeah. And I think a lot of things I just take for granted that I've learned over the years. And, what was once really hard for me doesn't seem as hard anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I'm not, I've not been doing the travel hunting and the things that you've done to the extent that you have for the amount of years. You have a ton of experiences, why I'm looking forward to chatting with you. But, even in my, more brief kind of approach or brief run with the travel hunting and the DIY kind of hunting, I've definitely noticed like those moments where, the light bulb kind of goes off and, you start to pick certain things up. And I've even noticed now, like, for example, someone might ask you a question and it's like, it might be something that I don't even think about whenever I'm scouting or when I'm hunting, but it's computing. And it's interesting because some people, like, to them, that's like a big nugget. Like that's the missing piece for them to like make the next evolution. But for someone who's been doing it a long time, it just becomes kind of how you do it. You know what I mean? It just becomes part of your process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but I feel like I'm walking around in the dark. So you have light bulbs. I wander around in the dark, but I find a way to figure it out.
Right. Yeah. Well, my bulbs are dim, so let's not go too far here. But hey, before we get started, man, I always like to just start off with, letting people know, where you're from and what you do for a living, so people get a little bit of a sense about who you are.
Sure. I'm from upstate New York, and I live on the southeastern edge of the Adirondack Park. And a lot of people are familiar with the area because we have a tourist trap here. It's called Lake George. Mm-hmm. It's a 32-mile long lake, and it's kind of set down in a valley between two mountain ranges. Other people who are familiar with thoroughbred horse racing might know it because I live just north of Saratoga Springs, where they have horse racing throughout August and a little bit into September. So they say it's the place to be. I was born and raised here. I went off to college for a while in like down near Pennsylvania on the border of New York, a little bit north of it, at a place called Oneonta.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I went to college there is because my father always took me bow hunting there when I was a kid. So I figured, well, I can go to school there. I can take English because I like English, and I'll major in that. And then I'll also be in an area where I can bow hunt. So I decided to go to college there. And when I finally sent in the paperwork, my mother looked at me and said, "You're not going there to hunt, are you?" And I said, "Definitely not, Mom." And I mean, it's bad to say, but that's really why I went there, because I knew I would have some type of comfort away from home, and I'd be in an environment that I was used to, even though I was away from home.
Right.
And so I ended up there, and I went to school. I completed my 4 years on time. And then I came home and I went to work for a company called Tribune Media Services. It was based out of Chicago. And they had an office unit in my hometown. So I went to work there as an editor. And I worked along there for a while. And they were expanding into international markets. And they asked if anybody had any background in foreign language. And throughout college, I had taken foreign language because it was easy for me. And I figured I could get good grades by taking foreign language because it was so easy for me. And in the process, I made a lot of people mad because I took advanced French classes in college. And a lot of the people were French majors, and they couldn't understand how I could do it so easily. So the company was expanding into the international market, and they wanted like French translators. Mm-hmm. So I worked as a French translator for 18 years for the company.
Wow.
So then history kind of goes in a circle. Mm-hmm. And the longtime copy editor of the business decided that she was going to retire. And my background is in English. So I became the head copy editor for the company. And I've been with the company for, I think this year will be 30 years.
Wow.
So I went there out of college. I graduated in May, started in June, and I've been there ever since.
Wow.
And I think I'm 51.
Right. Man, that's a great story, man. Like, you don't hear that very often. People, finding a place where they're, that they're comfortable, that they like. Cause I mean, the one thing for sure, it's like, if you've been there for that long, it's like, they must be treating people pretty well, which is a good thing to find this day and age.
Well, I won't get into it, but I work for like basically what you call corporate America. Mm-hmm. And I would not recommend that anybody work in corporate America.
Right.
The reason I've stayed there is because it's close to home. I've earned a lot of vacation time. I don't make a lot of money. I'll never make a lot of money, but I make enough to do the things that I want to do. Mm-hmm. And I have a flexible schedule that allows me to pursue the hobbies that I'm the most interested in.
Right. Yeah, man, you can't put a price on being happy and having an appropriate work-life balance. So
exactly.
I work in a pretty demanding industry, and so at times it is a struggle for work-life balance, and so that's one of those things where it's like, I'm always having to try to keep an eye on, so I always applaud those who are able to make, those choices, mindfully, and set themselves up to have that, to live the life that they want to, man, because I think that's what people are seeking.
To be honest, I went to college to be a teacher. And when I went to be a teacher, I did a little bit of, I sat in classes and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I decided right then, I told my father, I said, I don't want to be a teacher because I want to be a hunter. Mm-hmm. And I'm only going to be able to hunt on the weekends, and I'm not going to have any time off during hunting season. I want to do something different.
Yeah.
So kind of why I stay where I am, because it's allowed me to do what I have the most passion about.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, speaking of hunting, like, how did you get started hunting? I mean, it sounds like this was something that was a family affair, and you started relatively early.
Yeah, my brother's a little bit older. He's 2 years older, and he was going to be the hunter in the family, and I was going to be the fisherman.
Oh.
On our way home one night, like I live I live right on the edge of the mountains, and there are crop fields and stuff around us. And one day on the way home, it was after dark, and a raccoon ran across the road in front of us, and it went up into the cornfield beside the house. And my father said, "Come on, let's go get that," because you could shoot the coons and then skin them out and sell the pelts. So we ran over next door, and we treed the coon out of the cornfield, and my father shot it, and I cried and cried and cried. So I decided I'm not going to hunt. I couldn't handle it. I didn't like killing things, and it really bothered me. So my brother is a little bit older than me. He hunted and stuff, but I never really came into it until I was about 14 years old. And I mean, I was young when the raccoon incident happened. But as I got older, I learned, the value of life and death and stuff like that. And then I just became more in touch with nature, and I don't find any satisfaction in what you would say killing something, because killing something bothers me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know it's a part of hunting, and I know that it's the end result of you putting all your work together, and you accomplished a goal, and it's all the it's the ultimate, I don't know what you would call it, success in hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I became what I am now. And that's why I pursue specific animals most of the time, because I just want to play on their terms, and I want to see if I can outsmart them.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm still, I started hunting, super early. It was, Pennsylvania heritage, right? It's, kind of the birthright. You turn 12 when you're a boy in Pennsylvania. You're going out with your dad, your uncles, and stuff like that on the first day of deer season, and that's just kind of the way it is. I, of course, started a little earlier, going out with my dad, maybe hunting squirrels and tagging along for deer hunts and stuff like that. But I'm the same way as you, man, where, killing something's a heavy thing, and even though, you've been hunting for a lot of years, I've been hunting for a bunch of years, it doesn't make it any easier or any less heavy when it happens. And I just think that that's a normal human kind of reaction, in my opinion. I would assume, I guess maybe I might be naive, but I assume a lot of people feel that way. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, I would almost say it's 50-50. There are a lot of killers and there are a lot of hunters. And the difference between killers and hunters is big in my eyes. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people that just go to kill things. And that's not the way I was brought up. And I just don't respect people like that, because you should feel a part of it when you take an animal's life. And it's always bothered me. And but at the same time, it hasn't bothered me enough to stop. I mean, because I know it's a part of it.
Right. Yeah.
But I think get a thrill from the kill. And, and I do get a thrill from the kill, but it's not so I have to go kill again.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's, I'm trying to think. There was a really good quote that I saw from someone that kind of really summed it up for me. It was, and I'm going to butcher it here, but I'll kind of give what the gist of it was. It was something along the lines of not feeling remorse necessarily after killing an animal, a deer, or whatever it is, because I know who I am and I know what role I play in it, but it doesn't mean that it affects you any less deeply. You know what I mean? Like, so you're not remorseful necessarily because you know what the intent is, but it doesn't mean that there's not a feeling that's behind it. Right. And that to me really kind of summed it up really, really well, because that's exactly how I feel. You know what I mean? After it happens, it's like there's a moment of weight that happens where it's like I recognize I did something that's not able to be undone, right? Which is pretty significant. But I don't feel badly for it because I know what I am and what my intent was. But I can still recognize that moment for what it is, and I think that might be what we're both kind of getting at, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, man, how was your year this year? Did you have a good season overall? Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, like every season for me is good because if I can hunt, it's good. I mean, I don't base it on whether I killed something or not. Right. So I tell you, every season is good. I mean, I was fortunate enough. I went to 3 states this year and I killed deer in two of them. So, it was pretty good. The weather wasn't the best, but I made the most of it. My father really sick this year, and it caused me to have a different mental approach, because I tried to make it maybe easier for him, and I didn't mind that at all, and I learned a lot of things in the process of doing that.
Right. What states did you head to this year?
I hunted in Illinois, I hunted in Colorado, and I hunted in New York.
Okay, Illinois, Colorado, New York. Nice. And how was the Illinois trip?
Illinois trip was good. It was 80 degrees for I think I was there I don't know, was I there a week and a half maybe? And it was 80 degrees, but there were 4 of us, and we killed 3 deer, and my dad was struggling this year, and he wounded, I think, 1 and missed 1.
Yeah. Man, that's I'm assuming you were probably out in Illinois sometime around the first part of November with all that heat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was in Missouri about the same time, and it was, we had some decent action. I was kind of in the similar boat as your dad. Unfortunately, I ended up hunting a couple different pieces of public over the course of, I guess 7 days, and I guess I had 3 really good encounters, and ended up hitting one and losing it on the very last day, which was a bummer. But you do it long enough, it's going to happen. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, it's part of it. It doesn't make it any easier. You don't like it, but
no, it doesn't.
But so man, I want to talk to you. I want to start first with the area that you hunt in New York, in the Adirondack Mountains, just because. I hunt some areas that are big woods, and maybe I wouldn't refer to them as mountains, but, really large tracts of land that are unbroken by agriculture and low structure, right? Like not a lot of structure, not a lot of ag fields and things like that. Not a, ton of destination food source type places or anything like that. I just just describe for me a little bit about the area that you're hunting in New York.
Well, that's hard because I hunt so many different places, and no 2 places are alike. I do all of my hunting in what they call the Adirondack Park. And the Adirondack Park is, I think it's 6.5 million acres.
Man.
And yeah, most people think they're in a big patch when they're on 4,000 acres.
Right.
And of that acreage, half of it is public land. So the Adirondacks are considered forever wild, and that was done by Teddy Roosevelt. And the reason he made it forever wild is because back in the day, they were logging the heck out of it, and he thought that the entire area would be decimated by logging. So he wanted to save the land for the habitat, so it would make better habitat. And in the process, what they did is they made it so you can't really do anything on public land except for hunt, fish, camp a little bit. But there really isn't any food in most parts of the park for deer besides browse, because elevations in most parts of it, it's too high to grow oak trees, so you have no mast crops as far as acorns. And there are a lot of beech trees, but beech usually doesn't produce very often. It might produce every 3 to 4 years a good crop of it. And then when the beech does produce, there's usually so much of it that the deer don't have to move at all to actually, they don't have to move. They can lay down and they can eat and they can stay there and never move too far. And with land that big, it's hard to find deer. Like you can walk for miles and never even locate deer. We have a lot of different steep mountains. We have what they call the High Peaks region, which is where all the biggest mountains in New York are. And then as you get into the central Adirondacks, it's maybe lower peaks, rivers, streams, ponds, swamps. And every few years, we'll probably have somebody that gets lost and dies. They don't come out of the woods. And,
wow.
It can be intimidating. It's not some place that you just want to walk in with your Onyx map on your phone and, be comfortable with it. You really need to know how to read a map and a compass. And I was brought up from a young age being able to do that.
Right. Yeah. You get into that big a country and you lose service or your phone dies or the app goes on the fritz or something like that. You're in a world of hurt in that
Yeah,
situation. There's
without a
no
doubt.
there's no walking a couple miles in one direction. You'll eventually hit a road out in those types of situations. I would liken it to being out west, Montana, Colorado, wherever, one of those big.
See, it's weird. Like I can go to Colorado and I don't need anything out there, because the landmarks are so noticeable.
Significant. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but like where I live, there are really the area where I hunt. You can't really get high enough to see anything that you can say, oh, okay, because as soon as you go off elevation, you can no longer see it.
Right.
Well, most people do when they're lost, no matter where they're lost, they walk in a circle.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, being a good woodsman is part of being a good hunter in the area that I come from.
Yeah. And that's one thing, it's something, an art form that maybe has been, lost a little bit. And I try to, as much as I possibly can, have fellows like yourself on, or, there was a guy named Todd Hovel. I don't know if you know Todd. He does a lot of tracking. He's from, I believe, Michigan. I love the conversation I had with him because he's really relies on woodsmanship 100%, and I love talking to guys that's still how they hunt, because it's somewhat of a lost art. And the funny thing is the more that I've paid attention to those aspects, not coincidentally, I started having more success and finding myself having like better encounters or being in the, in the good stuff more often than not, essentially.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. When I think nowadays, too many people rely on technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of my success comes from the fact that my father brought me up, teaching me how to get around in the woods and showing me like people have a tendency to go the same way that deer do.
Mm-hmm.
And if I see an easy way to get like through a crack in a mountain, that's the way I'm going to go. And a lot of people don't even know what a saddle is. Like that's what a saddle is. You're going to take the easiest way through the mountain. So almost all the time, if you're, searching through the woods for deer signs, stuff like that, wherever the terrain brings you, it's probably going to bring deer also. So it's just something that you always got to kind of keep in the back of your head. Like I'm going this way for a reason. So deer probably will go this way for a reason also.
Right. Right. And then it's asking that question, why? It's like, well, if they're using this and you start seeing sign, right? It's like, then, well, why am I starting to see sign here when I hadn't seen it in other places? Right. It's like, am I getting close to food?
Yep.
Am I getting close to bed? Am I getting,
it's even deeper than that. It's like, that's what too many people I think that it's like, oh, food, bed, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it's in bigger woods, there are a lot of what they call dead zones. And you can go, a couple miles and not cut a track. And it's just because deer just don't live in that part of the woods. And it doesn't have anything to do with food or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just maybe that the does just don't hang out in that area that time of year when you're going through there. So there's no sign in there.
Right.
Other time of year, you might go through there and that'll be the place to be. Like more so than any place else I've ever hunted, the hunting changes during the season more in the Adirondacks. And it's kind of because of, it changes during snow. It changes during heavy leaf cover. It changes when the leaves are coming off. And it's never really the same. That's why I have a tendency to scout almost every day as I hunt. And it's just, I go to wherever I need to go. Like I don't get stuck in a place.
Right. Yeah. That was one of the interesting things as I was reading your book. I think you and I traded some messages back and forth, and it was really kind of hitting home for me because, how you approach things is, as I've evolved or continue to evolve or more and more how I, approach things. So it was interesting, how mobile you are, because it's funny because people think that mobile is this newfangled thing, but the more you talk to guys that have been in it for a long time, man, and have been successful, it's like they were mobile before mobile was cool. You know what I mean? Because that was what I was picking up while I was reading your stuff. I was like, this guy was hunting mobile and getting down and moving and wasn't burning a spot just because he thought or he had previously found success in a spot. Like if it wasn't hitting and the sign wasn't there, like he was burning boot leather figuring out where he needed to be. And does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, why waste your time in an area that the deer aren't there? I mean, it's funny. You'll see every year where certain individuals, they'll kill like giant deer, and then you might not ever hear from the person again.
Mhm.
And because they went someplace, they killed the deer there, and then they just always go back there because they expect the same thing to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's getting married to a spot can be detrimental to someone's growth and success.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of it.
Sure.
I have certain places where I know I can go back. Like some places I know absolutely for sure I can go back there and I'll kill a deer and I'll hunt those places. But I don't mind searching around other places.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's a couple places like that I'll I don't know how to say it. Like I'll check in on, maybe is a way to put it, you know, and see if, you know, cause you know, year over year, and I definitely want to talk maybe this will be the next thing we kind of discuss, you know, in certain areas, like you can find year over year patterns if you've run some trail cameras and stuff like that, or you've hunted it often enough that you started to see things like scrapes open up at a certain time or whatever the case is. And so you start to learn at those moments, you know, during those time periods that spot is going to turn on or be a lucrative spot potentially. Right. And so it's worth kind of passing through, but if it's not happening there, then you don't sit it out thinking that it's going to. Right. And so I know as I was reading through your book, like you started talking a little bit about that, that kind of approach of seeing, you know, annual data maybe is one way to say it, but that you started noticing like annual trends and like when things would kind of turn on or, you know, or turn off or whenever you needed to be in a certain area, kind of what you were talking about, where it's like deer and where you're at are so transient. They'll be in one spot for 2 weeks and then they may not be there again until the next year for those same 2 weeks. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you kind of navigate through that?
Sure. Like, I mean, I killed a lot of deer before there was any technology, but when technology started becoming more relevant in the deer hunting world, I decided to try it out and see what I could learn. So, the first year I wanted a trail camera. My father bought me a trail camera. So I'm like, oh, I'll try this. And then I got some pictures of deer. I'm like, oh, this is cool. So as time goes by, I used them a little bit, not a whole lot. And then, the more and more that I started hunting, I'm like, well, I'll just buy cheap trail cameras. So, just as an example, this year between my friend Brian and myself, across all of the Adirondacks, you know, that 6 million acres or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I think between the two of us, we had 65 cameras in the woods.
Nice.
So, and this isn't for this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's for next year, the year after. Like some places I've had a camera in there for 2 to 3 years and I haven't hunted there yet. I'm just collecting data.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have learned in a couple of the places that I hunt, I can tell you exactly when you need to be there in a 3-day stretch. And if you go there, you're probably going to fill your tag.
Right.
And it takes a lot of hard work to do that. And the thing is, you don't want to chase trail cameras during hunting season. You just want to go put them out before the season and collect them at the end of the season.
Right.
And then areas that I hunt the most, I really don't have a lot of trail cameras in there, maybe one, just kind of to see what's going on here and there.
Right.
Because I feel like some areas I've figured out and other areas I'm trying to figure out. Like this year, my buddy Adam and I, we put cameras in the same area. And this area is really hard to get to. I mean, it's an area I know I'll never see another person because it's just too difficult to get to.
Right.
So the end of the year, I went in there to pull my camera, and then I pulled one of Adam's or two of Adam's. I didn't know where the other ones were. And then we went through all the data on there. And when we looked at it, we realized between Halloween and the last weekend of our season, there were never more than 3 days in a row that a big buck wasn't in there in the daylight. And the reason they weren't in there is because the area is so hard to get to. It had absolutely no pressure. And, you know, of course, there were other things that led to it, but that was one of the big ones. And for the Adirondacks to have, I don't know, I think Adam had 14 different bucks on one camera.
Wow.
And that in the Adirondacks, there are, I mean, maybe 1 to 5 deer per square mile.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of these deer are just, one timers. Other ones visited the area where the camera was a lot. But like going into next year, I can almost guarantee you that Adam and I, one of us will kill a deer there.
Wow.
A good one.
Yeah, it's that's very similar to what I've seen in the big woods, is just that timing of, there's one particular spot that we found that is similar to what you're just kind of describing, where there was a huge primary scrape that was in this particular area, and there were a couple mature bucks. I'm guessing that their core ranges kind of overlapped, because there was no reason that anywhere else on this big piece of public we would never have multiple big deer kind of at the same, like in the same time period. They might come, like one might be using it during pre-rut, and then one might be using it like late rut, but we would never have them generally at the same spot at the same time. This one area, it would start like in September and it would go through like middle of January, and there would be multiple in there. And everywhere else we would have cameras, we'd have the same thing what you were talking about, where it's like you would have a 3 to 4 day window that was like a couple terrain features that were coming together that they were using to cruise, and you would have, a 3 to 4 day window where you were they were going to pass through there. And then if you were lucky, you would have a good scrape, and a licking branch there too, that would kind of sweeten the deal a little bit. But same exact thing. I thought I was in the chips this year. I sat at one of those spots this year, and I told this story previously, but I didn't see the deer I wanted to see in that spot at all. The weather wasn't great. This was in Ohio, and after I left Missouri, and on the last day, as I was walking out, I had to leave like midday to start my drive back home, and so I hunted the morning and was walking out. I had a deer blow whenever I got in my tree, and I knew like it couldn't smell me because my thermals were dropping down over the back edge of this ridge, and I kind of had the wind lightly in my face, and it was super foggy, so I knew she couldn't see me. And I assumed it was a doe, and I had been in my tree for like 10 minutes at this point, so it's like I couldn't figure out why she was blowing. And then I heard a grunt, but I was like, man, there's someone over there blowing on the grunt tube. You got to be kidding me, It was like, and I was like, who's gonna walk back? Because it was like close to 2 miles, back this like gnarly grown over road and stuff like that. And I was like, there's got to be kidding. There's actually someone back here. And then I heard the grunt move, and so I figured it was probably a deer, and I waited, till, I don't remember, I think I left around like noon. I had to leave to drive back home, and I was walking out, and where he was grunting from, or where grunt was coming from, it was up near where how I get in and out. And so as I was walking out, I jumped what I presumed to be a very large bodied deer by the sound it made hitting the ground as it was running, as I jumped it out of its bed. So it was probably the deer that I had been planning to see over the course of 3 days. He just never made his way down to that scrape in that funnel. So I don't know what my lesson was there. Maybe stay all day. But,
take a nap.
Take a nap. Yeah. Call my wife and tell her I'll be a day late, maybe, or tell work I'm going to be a day late. But man, I want to ask you, because the thing, as I was reading through this particular book, and something you mentioned, just a couple minutes ago, is as getting, like, you hunt specific deer. And to me, that's challenging in general, right? No matter where you're hunting, if it's farm ground or whatever, to know a specific deer and kind of go after a particular targeted buck is tough. But to do it on public land in like these big kind of vast kind of, pieces of public land, man, that's really up in the ante. And it's not like you're targeting, year and a half old bucks, like you're targeting mature bucks. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you not only find deer in this area that has such low deer density, but you manage to hunt a specific one that is a mature one out of this entire area?
That's pretty easy, because it's weird, but like most deer that you get on camera are, I won't say most, but a lot of them are mature deer, because in the area that I hunt, deer just don't survive the winters. So, I mean, a lot of deer get to maturity, but they're not like really, I mean, I killed a 6.5-year-old deer that had a 95-inch rack. That's where a lot of people like get so consumed with antler size. I see it online all the time. Like, I can see people commenting on other people, why'd you shoot that? I'm like, well, it was a 6.5-year-old deer. You ever shot one of them?
Right.
And people just don't understand that mature deer, they always base it on antler size. And So if I go into an area and I'm like trying to find a specific deer, um, I'll, we have all those cameras out. So usually I'll find it the year before. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll go in there the next year. I'll see if he's still in there. And if he's in there, then that's where I'm going to go try to kill him. But with that many cameras, I have a lot of different places to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So then I just kind of wander around and I can go to the different places. Like this year, I had one place where I knew there was a big buck and I knew that he would probably open this scrape around Halloween time.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in there and I found where he was working a little bit. And then I'm like, okay, I should be able to kill him around Halloween time. So, and I had the data. He'd showed up there like 2 years in a row and within a couple days. So I got out of work early. I think I can't remember if it was the 29th or the 30th of October. And it was a Friday. And so whatever that Friday was last year. And I had also found this other deer that was in there, and I had hunted it 3 days in a row, and I hadn't seen the deer, and the scrape was as big as like a small car hood. I'm like, I've hunted this area long enough. I know he's coming to that scrape, but the weather's been too bad. So then when the weather broke that Friday morning, I had all the other data from the place farther north. So as I was driving up the highway going north, I looked out across Lake George and I'm like, man, I should be over there on that side. I know he's coming here today. And, but I'm like, no, I have too much data and this other buck is bigger farther north. So I went farther north. I got up there. I got in a blizzard in the afternoon. I sat there that night. I sat there the next morning and I saw nothing. Didn't see any deer. And then I still hunted around in the snow to see if I could cut tracks. Nothing. So then I come back to the place down south that I drove by on the way up there where I knew I should have went. I should have went with my gut because your gut feeling is always right over statistics usually.
Right.
And I had a big 8-pointer in that scrape right before dark where I would have been sitting. And then I had the day before I had a 10-pointer in there also. No, it would have been the day after. And he was in the daylight also.
Jeez.
So if I with my gut and hunted that place because I had hunted there 3 days in a row. I knew he was showing up on the 4th day because the weather broke.
Right.
And sure enough, 2 different big bucks showed up there, and then nothing showed up where I had the quote unquote data.
Right. It's kind of how it always
going with your gut is better than going with your data. So you have to be able to determine what do I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to when you first started kind of laying out the scenario there, because you knew that scrape kind of around Halloween was going to be the time to kind of be there. And you said you kind of found where he was working, right? It was like what you had mentioned. What was it particularly that you had seen or, like, how did you know he was in that area? Was there something that he laid down that was very distinctly him?
Yeah, early in the year. I found 3 big rubs and 1 really big rub. And the really big rub was right on the tree with the licking branch in the car hood scrape.
Okay.
So it was a no doubter. Like I knew he was in there and I knew he'd been in there regularly already. Mm-hmm. In the coming week, which was going into November, like I've hunted that area long enough to know that like it gets really active in there. And, but I just made the wrong choice. I mean, plain and simple.
Right. Yeah. And that happens more times than not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've always told people like, go with your gut and don't overthink it. And I just simply overthought it.
Right. Yeah. That's one thing that it's easy to say and hard to do, at least for me, at least for me, it is, it's, I've had my best hunts, whenever I kind of, I don't want to say fly by the seat of my pants, but I just kind of make reaction decisions. In one way that I don't necessarily advocate for this necessarily. It seems to work better for me. I started kind of more freelance hunting places that I've never scouted before, more so than hunting places that I've scouted. And I've actually been able to have more encounters doing that because I'm only reading what I see as opposed to what I've known from like prior information. And it keeps me honest. And it's funny because my buddy kind of commented on it. He's like, man, when you go out of state, he's like, you have great encounters, you get on deer. He's like, often he's like, you'll kill deer, he's like, in Pennsylvania, he's like, you almost outthink yourself. He's like, and I'm like, you're right to a degree. I was like, cause I had a particular deer that I played cat and mouse with this year. That was a great deer. And it was just like, when I was there, he wasn't. And when I wasn't, he was, like, every time. Yeah. I'd miss him by a day every single time. You know what I mean? And,
oh yeah,
and it's just kind of what you were saying. Like, my gut was telling me, like, it was a primary scrape, and I knew he would hit it, and he did. And it just, whenever I was there, he wasn't. And so my gut was telling me, dude, you need to move like 40, 50, 60 yards. Like, not a lot. You just need to make a move and try to get back in this business a little bit more. And I just I was reluctant to, because I was like, no, he's hitting this. It's just a matter of like waiting him out. I know he's going to. And it never happened. Right. So if I would have went with my gut, it's like I may have got an opportunity, at that particular deer, but as it stands, he lives to see another day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's my friend Brian. He, like, when he's out of state, like, he has all the encounters more than anybody, but like back in state, it doesn't work that way. And it's kind of like he overanalyzes and overthinks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this year I'm going to throw a little bit more caution to the wind. I think actually I did use the snow to my advantage after I talked to you, because you were going out in the snow, and I was like, all right, I was like, Todd's going out in the snow. I'm hitting the snow too. And it was too deep to get a lot done. But what I did find, because this piece was relatively new to me, I found exactly how they were kind of working, at least in the snow, and how they were kind of getting to the place where I had found that big primary scrape. So I figured out what their line of travel, and I was like, man, 40-yard move north and a little bit east, and probably puts me in the business. I was like, because with all the foliage on the trees in early-ish to mid-October, I was like, there could be deer walking through here and I'd never see them.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it was just that little tidbit of information where I'm like, okay, if I do make a move, this is the move that I'll make. So, but I wanted to ask you, I've noticed this in like certain big wood settings, and so I'm curious to see how this plays in the Adirondacks, but are there particular like terrain features or habitat features or a specific elevation that you've been able to key in on? Like, if you went into a new spot, that there's particular things that you're going to look at, you're like, I know that there's a low deer density and there's dead zones, but if I'm going to prioritize, it's this terrain, this habitat, or this elevation where I'm going to start. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Now, if you ask like all the, I don't know what I would call them, legendary Adirondack hunters,
mm-hmm.
I'd say you ask 10 of them, you're probably going to get 9 different answers.
Right.
And it's because everybody has a different hunting style.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just tell you what I do, which might be totally opposite from what other people do.
Right.
I'm a kind of person who I relate deer to people. Okay, so what do you need as a person? A deer needs the same thing. It needs to eat, it needs to drink, and it needs cover. So you need to eat your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You might be able to skip a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
You need a place to sleep where you're going to be protected from, people trying to get you, the weather, all that stuff. And then you're going to need a place to drink, because you have to drink every day or you won't survive. So what I do is I try to focus around like water areas, because you're going to find everything around water. If you get into like an area that has a bunch of beaver flows and stuff like that, or like small lakes, small ponds, you'll always find a lot of deer sign around them, because they have everything that they need there. So when I look for different places in the Adirondacks, I always look for swamps, ponds, and rolling hills. Although we have big mountainous terrain and stuff, I don't like to hunt on a lot of it. I will hunt in some of it, but I'm not a fan of hunting on steep stuff. And it's not because deer aren't there, and it's not because deer don't get killed there. It's just because I don't prefer that. I feel like I'm more successful in other areas. But then if you ask a handful of other guys, they're going to say, go to the highest point you can go on the mountain, then hunt your way down it. Right. And see what happens. But as far as me, I'm a swamp edger where fingers run down into the swamp. So a lot of the big bucks, they'll travel along the edge of the swamps, and then there'll be fingers that come down off the ridges and stuff. And if there's danger on either side of them, they can quickly escape. They can go into the swamp because it's thick, like nothing's going to be in there. And if they have danger from the swamp side, they can just run up those fingers. And in the areas that we're in, the landscape is so huge that, I mean, it doesn't take long for them to disappear. You'll never see them again.
Right. Do you take a similar approach when you go out of state? Or are you looking for similar things when you're traveling?
To be honest, this is going to sound really weird, but like when we go out of state, I do a lot of aerial scouting, and my friend Brian and my dad usually go a week before me. Mm-hmm. And I do all the aerial scouting, and then I supply them with a bunch of maps and places to go to look at. Mm-hmm. What they do is they hunt, but they hunt in the morning and then in the evening, and they hunt in all these new places that I've given them to look at. And it really, although I look for the things that I look for in the Adirondacks, it's more of just cover as much ground as you can in a certain area and see what you find.
Right. Does
that make sense to you?
No, it totally makes sense. And I kind of follow a similar approach. I do a fair amount of online scouting as well, looking at aerial maps and stuff like that before I get there. And oftentimes, like this year in Missouri, I never set foot on the piece of property until I, or never saw it in person until I hunted it, and that was was it. Which, like I'd mentioned previously, it actually is to my benefit because I don't outthink myself, but I do look for similar things, right? It's like I try to find areas that are, you're probably similar in this way, like water, right? I try to find things that are going to keep people out. Like, so any time I have to cross water or climb a ridge or something like that, that's going to keep people from, possibly being there. I'll look for those types of things. So it sounds like we have a similar approach, but I need to find a buddy that'll go out a week ahead of time. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I do my part too.
Oh, sure.
But, like I'm a little better on the computer than they are. Mm-hmm. And so it just works out better. But like, I mean, when I get there and then I'll do the same thing. Like we just moving. And like what you were just talking about, like go to where the people aren't. Like recently I've kind of started avoiding that. Mm-hmm. That with all the big DIY and public land stuff, you find it all over the place now. And that's what people push all the time.
Yep.
Like this, the deer I killed, I was 100 yards off the road. I could see cars going by on the road. Mm-hmm. So I also look for places that nobody would even imagine sitting because it looks like it sucks so bad.
Yeah, I hear you there. I had a good hunt like that on an out of state trip where after I shot the buck, it ran down the side of this ridge. It was a crappy climb up. It wasn't a long climb, but it was steep. And it's actually one of those places you were kind of talking about before, which was like year over year. That place is just, if I don't go hunt it, I actually send my buddy Tate. He's the old timer that turned me on to bow hunting. He'll go there and I'll, cause the first year I went there, we went together. I just found this spot. I killed a buck. Next day I put him in the same tree I was in. He killed a buck the next day. And so when I don't go there, he goes there on his own. And every year he sees a couple hammer deer, he sometimes gets a shot, sometimes doesn't, but it's legitimately, it might be 0.2 of a mile max from where you park, but it's straight up and you kind of get to the top of this ridge and there's just like primary scrapes laid down up there. And the buck that I shot there, it ran downhill and died like probably 30 yards from the log yard landing. And it was maybe a total of like a 70-yard drag to the road to put it in my truck. It couldn't have worked out. It couldn't have worked out any better, But I love those little overlooked spots, man. But one thing I've started doing a lot more of is actually using water access this year. So using a boat. That's the one thing I have found that still will kind of keep people out. And you're right, because with the DIY stuff, Onyx and things like that, people are willing to go further. But I have found like using a boat and getting into those kind of little areas does cut down on the traffic pretty significantly. Do you do any? Well, I know you do. I've seen some pictures of you with a kayak. You do some kayaking in, right?
Yeah, I used I think it was in my second book, which no longer is available. I talked about my boat hunting because that's all I did for 20 years, maybe hunted out of a, and then I'll tell you what, no deer is worth dying for.
Right.
In the area that we used to hunt out of a boat, we had a boat with a 50 horse motor on it, and a wave came over the top of it and sunk the boat in December.
Oh, wow.
December in the Adirondacks is not good.
Yeah.
And after that, I decided I'm going on the water as little as possible.
Right.
And, I do use a boat. I have used a boat. I still use like a canoe or kayak or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I can avoid it. I will. And trust me, I can swim well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not afraid of the water or anything, but I just prefer to not have any risk of anything happening.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because I will say this was the first year that I've used water access, and that was actually in Pennsylvania. A lot of what I did was water access, and actually in Missouri, the one spot was water access only. And when I'm here in PA by myself, it is a little freaky being out in the middle of a lake, or a big body of water, by yourself in a kayak. You're paddling in dark, and you're paddling out in the dark, and there's, during the day, I might hear some people fishing around or other people kayaking around or whatever. But, when you're coming in and going out, man, there's not a soul around except the stars. And
I mean, don't get me wrong. I've killed some really big deer, using a boat and stuff like that, but I would prefer not to, even though sometimes it's a little better. And then I will use it at that point.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those two things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.